So in this video, I thought we'd look at a couple 737s that come default with their respective flight simulators. I thought we'd look at the 737 MAX that comes out of the box in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, and then we're gonna look at the 737-800 that comes with X-Plane 12, and we can kind of determine which one, we think is better. And then as a bonus, maybe later we'll look at a third 737 just so we can maybe have some perspective on how good we actually have it. First, right off the bat, let's look at the 737 MAX that comes with Microsoft Flight Simulator. And since 2024 is using, new rendering and texturing technology, I have to say the external model for this plane actually it looks really good. Just all around, and all the nooks and crannies and the wheel bins and all the rivets and the decals. Now, I'm not going to really discuss third-party 737s like the PMDG 737s. I'm just talking about vanilla out-of-the-box default ones that come with the flight simulators. I have to say with the 2024's decal technology, you can get right up on all the stencils and read them. From a 3D modeling perspective, there really is no comparison between 2024 and X-Plane. It just looks so nice. You can even see the little studs, the little hairs on the tires. And since 2024 has walk-around mode, we actually can open the cargo bay doors if you wanted to and look inside. You can open up the front one too. Now, where the issues with this 737 come into play is with its systems, and it's not very well simulated, and I'll try and demonstrate that once we get inside the cockpit. All right, now that we're in the cockpit, we can start to look at the flight model and the systems. Now for both simulators, we're going to be doing the same flight. Let me just bring over a little nav map. We're going to be doing the same flight from Miami International. We've got one waypoint, and then we're going to go over to Tampa International, just a short flight across Florida, and we're going to do the same flight for both flight simulators. So with that, let's go ahead and hide the yokes and actually start to fire this plane up. All right, we've got ground power available. Go ahead and align the IRS. Let's see how much fuel we have. I think we have too much fuel for the trip that we're doing. We can go ahead and bring that down. Set it manually here. We don't need any in the center tank. And I'd say set that to pounds. I'd say 6,000 pounds in each wing should do it. Now, unfortunately, you can't really go into the cabin, and clicking on this to open the door just takes you back outside the airplane. You probably can do it in drone mode, but I think that's lame. We can go ahead and start the APU. I'm not really going to be following realistic procedures. I'm just going to kind of do it as we go. Oop, I forgot to turn on the battery. That would probably help. Let me hit the APU again. I think the IRS is aligned instantly, so we can go ahead and program our little flight plan here. KMIA for Miami International, and Kilo Tango Papa Alpha for Tampa. And just for the heck of it, I've got runways set up here. You can depart just off of runway 30, and we'll arrive at 1 right in Tampa. And I guess at this point I can add my waypoint, delete the discontinuity, and activate and execute. And we can check it using plan mode. That all looks good to me. I have to say that they did a really good job getting all the details of the FMC in Flight Simulator. And we'll just cruise at 11,000 feet. It's not that far. Let's see if we can sync our zero fuel weight just by clicking on it. It looks like we can. Reserve of 1. A cost index of 100. I'm going to say that you can program all of this stuff But there seems to be an issue with the pitch trim in this 3.7 Max in Flight Simulator 24, and we'll see that once we take off. We can go ahead and program our takeoff. I'm gonna choose flaps 10, and it does give us our V speeds, so I'm gonna go ahead and insert those, and we can automatically set our CG, and it's saying we need a trim of 3.25, so I'll set that once we're ready to take off. Looks like the APU started, so we can switch over to APU power and turn off ground power. So another thing is, if I go outside, so the elevator on the 737 is, I think it's manual. It's still connected by cables for safety, but none of the ailerons work. I'm moving my joystick left and right, and none of the ailerons are moving. The flaps should move with the electric hydraulic pumps. Let me just set that to 10 now. Let me look at the flap indication needle. So they're not moving now on the electric pumps. And I think they should be able to. They only start moving once the engines are running. All right, let's finish setting up the airplane and get started. You can turn on the fuel pumps. Note that you can switch all the fuel pumps on and off individually. And we've got no fuel in the center tank, so we're not going to turn those on. Turn on our lights. Turn on the yaw damper. And the window heats. And with that, I think we're ready to push back, so move the armrest and turn the parking brake off, and we can push back. So the engines should not spin if I have the packs turned on. So I'm going to start engine 1 first, set it to ground. The packs pressure isn't dropping, so the automatic mode isn't turning them off. And notice the EECs have booted up, so you can see all of the readouts for engine 1, but engine 2 is blank. So that looks accurate. But the engine isn't spinning yet. I have to turn the packs off first before the engine will spin. And there we go, we have N2. So at 20%, I can turn on fuel. Now our EGT is rising, so that indicates engine light off. Now that that engine is starting, look at the flaps. The moment it starts, those flaps are going to start to move. So it says low pressure for engine 2, but not for engine 1. And the flaps aren't moving. Okay, so let's start engine 2 now. Set it to ground. Wait to reach 20% N2. And engage fuel. There's something wrong there. See, now that engine 2 has started, the flaps immediately start to move. So it's like only the hydraulics for engine 2 work for the flaps. So I don't think that's correct. The engine-driven hydraulic pump for engine 2 is the only one that moves the flaps. So I doubt that that's accurate. That seems kind of odd to me. But now that we have both engines started, we can go ahead and taxi out to the runway. So I looked it up, and apparently both the electric and the engine-driven hydraulics should be able to move the flaps, so that's kind of broken. Also, I forgot to switch over to the engine generators. That's my fault. We can switch off the APU. Now, what did the FMC say for trim? It says 3 1/4, so that's about right, the way that it is. But also, as I move the trim, look at how fast the trim wheel spins. I think the pitch trim on this is way too sensitive. So that's kind of another issue with this airplane. And it can make taking off difficult because this airplane is so stiff in pitch. I don't really know how to describe it, except that unless you trim it just right, it doesn't want to pitch up or down very easily. So I question how accurate the flight model is, at least in terms of its pitch stability. Go ahead and taxi out onto the runway. All right, and toga. I want to rotate it about 140 knots or so. Rotate. All right, I've got my joystick pulled all the way back and it's still not wanting to lift off, so I'm going to hit the trim. See, there it goes. So I'm having to add a lot of up trim just to get it to lift up off the runway. Bring the gear up and start raising the flaps. Once you get it trimmed right, it flies fine, but that pitch trim issue is very, very annoying. Also, I don't know if you just heard there, but the engine sounds for inside and outside the cockpit don't seem synchronized. So you'll throttle up inside the cockpit and you'll hear the engine spool up, but then you go into outside view and you'll hear the engine spool up again to match the sound inside. So that's kind of a sound bug with this one. Go ahead and raise the flaps all the way. And we turn on flight level change and LNAV. And turn on the autopilot. We can increase speed to 240 knots until we get to 10,000 feet. Also, before I forget, let me make sure my packs are on, and they're not. I forgot to set those up. So now our cabin should be pressurizing. You can see the cabin altitude dropping. So that's my fault. Make sure I set the cabin altitude to the right altitude. So in that aspect, it seems to be working fine. You'll see the cabin altitude respond to the correct application of bleed air, assuming your pilot isn't a dummy and doesn't turn them on like they're supposed to. And now that we're above 10,000 feet, I can turn the landing lights off. I can also increase speed to above 300 knots. So notice that we get the correct airspeed, overspeed warning on the airspeed tape. So that's starting to show, and the limit is 340 knots. So remember that so keep that in mind, remember that. So now we're established in a cruise at 11,000 feet, and we're following our programmed route. As far as the quality of the sounds themselves go, they're not bad. The Leap 1B engines on the Max have that very distinctive whine sound, and it seems like it's pretty well depicted in Microsoft Flight Simulator. After Sim Update 3, I've been getting better performance, but it's still not great, at least not compared to Flight Simulator 2020. And I don't know about you, but I get amazing performance in X-Plane 12, so it's not my hardware. I know I can get good performance in graphically complex simulators. It's something wrong with Flight Simulator. I've got frame generation turned on and everything else, and I still get really bad stuttering. But I'm sure that will improve over time, but it's still kind of frustrating. All right, we're starting to come up on our top of descent here. And as I play for longer and longer, the stutters in Flight Simulator are getting worse and worse. So hopefully we don't have issues. There's got to be some kind of memory leak or something somewhere. So they've still got some work to do in terms of the optimization, but we're getting close to top of descent. So let me make sure I've got the ILS programmed correctly. So we're landing on 1 right, so we need 111.95, and that's not set correctly here, so. So with that, we should be ready to descend and land once we get close to Tampa. All right, we're just crossing top of descent. Oh, these stutters are killing me. Go ahead and set 3,000 feet and flight level change. And since we're passing through 10,000 feet almost immediately, I'm going to reduce speed to 340 knots. And I can also hit the landing lights. It's not doing a very good job. I better set my vertical speed manually to... Oh, these stutters are getting so bad. I'll just use vertical speed to control my airspeed. You can see we're slowing down a lot better now. All right, we're at 240 knots. I'll just re-engage flight level change. And I can add in the first notch of slats and flaps at 250 knots. So that's what I'm going to do. Really violent pitch change. It doesn't like that at all. And it's really fighting me. Does not like that at all. The autopilot behavior is questionable. It sometimes reacts really aggressively to changes. All right, that's a good sign. I'm seeing the carrots for the ILS start to appear, and it's following the route towards the runway. There's clouds in the way, so I can't see the runway. All right, that's 3,000 feet. I'll engage approach mode. And for some reason, it's not letting me set approach mode. The glide slope carrot is not filled in, so maybe it has to, the glide slope has to start coming down before I can do that. I don't know. But it's not letting me engage approach mode, even though laterally I'm on the approach. But I do need to slow down even more. I'm just going to set my landing speed and let the airplane slow down. And see, I just passed the glide slope, and it's still not letting me engage approach mode, so I'm just going to do it manually. Disengage autopilot, and go ahead and add full flaps and put the gear down. I do think that I remember seeing in the approach options that this was just a localizer and not an ILS, so maybe that's why. Maybe this runway actually doesn't have an ILS. Whatever. See if I can reacquire that glide slope. There we go, that's looking better. I can actually flip down the HUD, and that gives me a good indication of what my glide slope actually is. So the auto throttle should disengage automatically once I get right over the runway. We'll see if it does that. It doesn't look like it is. I'm turning it off manually and cutting power. There. That was touchdown. Turn on thrust reversers. Go ahead and use up the whole runway, because why not? That was not a very good landing, but I think that's operator error and not necessarily the fault of Asobo. But that's pretty much all I want to show of the 737 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now let's go ahead and switch over to the 737 that comes default in X-Plane 12. All right, here we are switched over to X-Plane 12, and we've got the 737-800 that comes default with X-Plane 12. Now this isn't the Zibo mod or the Level Up mod. This is just the plain vanilla 737 that comes with X-Plane 12. And X-Plane 12 doesn't have the same kind of rendering technology that Flight Simulator has, so if you get right up close to stuff, it doesn't look quite as good. But if you zoom away and look at it from a distance, if you look at it from distances that it's supposed to be viewed at, it looks perfectly fine. It's got rivet detailing, and everything looks to be fairly accurate. It's got the bleed air and static air ports. You got the door there. I can actually, from this view, I can click on it and open it from the outside view. There's a look inside the engine. For what it is, it's a very nice 3D model externally of the 737-800. Here's a look at the landing gear. We don't get the little hairs on the tires like we do in Flight Simulator. It turns out, I think, you can open the cargo bays. Not as much detail inside, but it is there. You can open them. Finding the click spot to close them again is a bit tricky. And you can open the front one as well. Again, finding the click spot to close it again is a bit of a pain. There we go. And I think you can open all the doors. Even the service doors on the right-hand side, you can open those. And the one in the back as well. Go ahead and close it. Maybe. There we go. So externally, the model is not bad at all. For what it is, it's a perfectly decent and nice representation of a 737 out of the box. And once we're inside, this is something that you can't do in flight simulators. You can open the door, and it does have a full cabin with complimentary sodas. And we can go ahead and walk all the way back to the aft galley, and we can help ourselves to snacks in the aft galley if we wanted to. Unfortunately, you can't open the lavs, but they are represented here. It's not the nicest textures, but there's no nasty, artifacts or modeling discrepancies. It's very basic, but still nice, especially for a plane that comes default with the game. And we can close the door, and we can go ahead and starting the airplane. So I can turn on the master battery by closing the cover. And so the switches for the fuel pumps, it's just both switches for left and both switches for right. You can't switch them individually. I'm going to go ahead and start the APU. So again, for this flight, I'm going to do the exact same route that we did in Flight Simulator from Miami to Tampa with one waypoint to keep it fair. You can see the APU door is open, and you can see the heat blur effect of the APU. You can just hear it starting to spool up. So APU gen off bus, I can engage the APU generator and we have electricity. So on this one, you can't align the IRSs. They're always on. I personally don't care. I always found aligning airliners to be annoying and tedious, but if that's something that bothers you, you can't operate the ILSs on this one. So I guess we could go ahead and program our flight route. And in X-Plane, it has this neat feature where if I click on the screen, it pops up a two-dimensional FMC for me to use. And I'm going to go ahead and program our route now. So just like before, we're departing from KMIA. And we're arriving in Tampa. And we're departing from runway 30. You can activate that. And we're arriving at runway 1 right. And for the sake of fairness, I'm not going to choose another runway. So it has an actual ILS. Looks like there's only RNAV or RNV available for 1 right, but that's what we're going to use for the sake of fairness. And then I'm going to make sure that I've got my waypoint. Lima Bravo Victor. Execute and then clear the discontinuity. And close it. So let me see if I can clear some of this clutter. We can switch it to plan mode. And I can step through the waypoints, theoretically. There we go. It seems to be not working right now. It was working before. So yeah, I can't step through my waypoints to see my flight plan. But it does seem to be, if I zoom all the way out, I can see that it's all there. I will say that the FMC that comes with X-Plane is very generic. This is a very generic Boeing FMC. And I don't think I can set my cruise altitude. There are some things that it can't do that nicer 737 models can do. Like I don't think you can program your zero fuel weight in this. Yeah, you can't program your weight and balance and your cruise index and things like that in here. It does do lateral navigation. So that's our route programmed. Let me go ahead and set up our fuel so we have the same fuel as before. In the next plane, you just open a page, and I'm going to set us to 8,000 pounds of fuel total. And you can see that reflected here. So with that, I guess we're ready to push back and start. So I'm going to engage the APU bleed air. We can turn on the packs just for now. So I was giving the Flight Simulator 737 a hard time before about how quickly the bleed air needles move. This one actually seems to be a bit worse in that regard. It's just instantaneous bleed air pressure changes. So it's not really simulating a bleed air system in very high detail, but it is technically simulating it. You can see the bleed air pressure ducts, the duct pressure reacting to your changes. But let's try another experiment. Let me turn on the electric hydraulic pumps. We can go outside and look. So my flight control surfaces are moving. There's my ailerons. Let me turn the hydraulic pumps, the electric pumps off and make sure the pressure drops. So that's another thing is I can't change the MFD display from engine to system. So the system depth in the displays is not as good as in Flight Simulator. But it's saying low pressure, so if I go outside, the elevator is not moving. I'm moving my joystick. The rudder moves, and I think that's accurate because I think the rudder is still a physical pulley and cable system in the 737 NG. So that moves, but my elevator doesn't move, and my ailerons don't move. Now, let me set the flaps to 10. And if we look at the dial, the flaps aren't moving. And if we go outside, the flaps aren't moving. Now let me turn on the electric pumps. And you see they are moving now. And the flaps and the slats are starting to come down. So that is more accurate than the flight simulator model. So the hydraulic systems are programmed correctly. I don't know if that's just a bug in the Flight Simulator 3.7 or if that's just, they haven't bothered to do it correctly. But in X-Plane, it does seem to work the way it's supposed to. But let me finish setting this thing up. Let me go ahead and turn on the lights. We can turn on the fuel pumps. There's nothing in the center tank, so I'm not going to turn on the center pumps. I forgot to turn on standby power, but big deal. And we can turn on the window heats. And with that, we're ready to push back, so I'm going to go ahead and use a plugin called Better Pushback, which is a must-have in X-Plane. This is really something I wish Flight Simulator did. I just select where I want my plane to be pushed back, and click, and enter.
Ground to cockpit, plan acknowledged. Call me through the menu when you are ready.
So there's our tug showing up, and she's gonna push us back right where I asked to be pushed back. And we can actually we can actually start our engines and do checks while we're being pushed back, which is more accurate to Flight Simulator. The pushback system in Flight Simulator is just awful. Like being asked to turn left and right through the ATC menu is just so clunky. It's terrible.
Okay, all doors and hatches are closed. Ready to connect.
Set that to 240 knots and turn on the flight directors on both sides.
Tow connected and bypass pin inserted. Release parking brake.
And I can go ahead and release the parking brake, and she'll push us back.
Starting pushback, and you may start engines.
All right, now that we're being pushed back, I can start the engines. Let me turn. Well, first, let's try starting the engines with the packs on and see if it does it. Set that to ground. And that's interesting. So, APU is on. And the packs are running, so the engines are spinning with the packs turned on. So I don't think that's accurate necessarily. But we do have light off. The engine is starting. We can go ahead and start the right engine now. 20% N2, engage fuel. I can go ahead and engage the generators on both sides, disengage the APU, and shut down the APU. So she's finished pushing us back, and she's pushed us away from the gate and facing the direction that we need to taxi out to the runway. And while she's disconnecting us, I can go ahead and turn on the lights and actually remember to set up the pressurization properly this time. All right, and with that, we're ready to taxi out to the runway, so parking brake off, and we can start taxiing. And I will say the ground handling physics in X-Plane are so much better. The planes actually feel like they have some weight to them. In Flight Simulator, they just kind of all feel like go-karts when you taxi. Now, I will say that there is a free mod for this 737 called the Zebo mod, and it basically fixes all of the inaccuracies that we've seen in this video with the default one, and it makes it just extremely high quality, like PMDG levels of quality, and it's 100% free to download. All you got to do is drop it into your X-Plane folder, and it's good to go. I don't know if you've noticed, but the airport in X-Plane, this is Miami International, is much higher detail than in Flight Simulator. In Flight Simulator, it's auto generated. But in X-Plane, almost all of the airports are handcrafted because they've sort of crowdsourced all of the airports. And over the years, they've just added more and more handcrafted airports to the simulator that the community has created. And it's all handcrafted by default, a vast majority of the airports. Now, they're using generic building blocks for all of the buildings, but even though it's sort of generic Lego brick buildings that they're using, I still think they look a lot better than in Flight Simulator. And of course, you can always, if there's a particular airport you want, you can always just get payware scenery. All right, we're coming up to the end of the runway. And again, we can't program our weight and balance, so I'm just going to leave it at 5 for our trim. The sounds are very, very good. I'll give it that. I like the sound of the NG a lot more than the Max. All right, 140 knots, rotate. And it pitches up just fine. Gear up. And we can start turning towards our first waypoint. So the actual flying physics in X-Plane are much nicer than Flight Simulator. The actual simulation of the physics of flying is just so much nicer in X-Plane than it is in Flight Simulator. Whoops. Interfering with traffic here. I'm not using ATC. But once we get facing towards our first waypoint, I'll go ahead and engage the autopilot. So when I hit level change, the throttles immediately respond, even though I don't have the autopilots engaged. I'll use heading select to get us towards the flight path, and I can increase our climbing speed to 240 knots. I can go ahead and bring the flaps up all the way. So that's another thing. I had the flaps set to 10 this whole time, and there's no red warning tape anywhere on here. And you'll see later that once we get up to cruising altitude and we get close to cruising speed, there's no red tape indicating a maximum speed. So that's another kind of systems fidelity inaccuracy with this default X-Plane 337. And again, oh, there goes LNAV. It just engaged. So that's another thing that the Zibo mod fixes that again is 100% free. And we're already at cruising altitude, so I can shut off the landing lights. And we can go up to about 300 knots for cruise. X-Plane kind of has this constant wing vapor effect, depending on how fast you're going and everything else. It's kind of annoying. You can switch it off, but sometimes it shows up when it's not supposed to. But the sounds for this 737 are very nice. I do like them a lot. And another thing that X-Plane has that Flight Simulator doesn't have is a flyby view. The camera views in X-Plane are much nicer than in Flight Simulator. But yeah, see, going all the way up to 340 and 350, there's no red overspeed tape, so that's another little inaccuracy. I'm going to leave the airplane in cruise, and then we'll come back once we get to our top of descent near Tampa. All right, we're coming up on our top of descent, and you see there's no little green top of descent indicator here, so I'm going to have to do that manually, which is fine. Go ahead and set 3,000 feet and engage level change. That's a pretty aggressive descent that it's doing. So not necessarily the best autopilot behavior with these default planes. I think a 2,000-foot descent should be more than enough to get us down in time. Oh, and we're below 10,000 feet. I better slow down. Remember to turn on my landing lights as well. I might have started my descent way too early, but again, I have no indicator showing me when I should descend. It's lots of little things that all add up that kind of reduce the quality and make nicer payware planes like the PMDG 737s or the flight factor stuff so much more worth it. We can start aligning ourselves with the runway. I am getting a fuel warning that's just telling me that we're getting close to below 2,000 pounds for each wing. I don't think you'd want to ever go this low for fuel, but you do see that warning there. All right. Again, there's no real ILS for this runway that I've selected, so I'm just gonna take manual control. And now that we're on final, I'll go ahead and put in 140 knots. That's usually what I like to land at. We're looking a bit high, but that's my fault. All right, flaps full, gear down. And I ended up going way too high, so I'm gonna add air brake. And there we go, not bad. Didn't use up as much runway as I did last time. But that's pretty much all I wanted to show of the default 737 that comes in X-Plane. But there's one other 737 I wanted to look at, just so we can have a little perspective on, regardless of what simulator you fly, how good we actually have it, even with these default planes. All right, welcome to Flight Simulator 10. And this is the 737-800 that comes with FSX. And yeah, we've come a pretty long way since old FSX. I mean, it's not bad. It's still just a 737 NG. The external model is not bad, but where this old airplane really falls apart is inside the cockpit. You can't use the FMCs at all. They're just blank. You can click on the autopilot. Yeah, let's try starting the engines in this thing and see how realistic it is. I can turn on the lights. All the landing lights are just one switch. The fuel pumps make a unusual sound. But I think to start the engines, all you gotta do is just click these. You don't even have to start the APU or anything. They just start. Oh, no, they're not starting. They'll spin even though the APU is technically not on. So I can turn the APU on and off. You can't click on anything with the bleed air. None of that is clickable. None of the window heats or pitot heats are clickable. Oh, I can turn on the pitot heats, but the lights don't come on. What else? You see, both of the fuel control switches are open. They're on. So nothing makes any sense because it's so inaccurately simulated in what you can and can't control that you don't know, you know, you can't follow through with it logically and figure out what's working and what's not. So I don't even know if I can start it manually. All right, I'm just going to hit Control E. See, there it goes, it starts. There you go, that's it. Let's see if I can engage the thrust reversers. There you go. Back away from the gate. Call me crazy, but I actually think the ATC speech in FSX is more realistic sounding than in the new simulators with AI. I don't know, maybe I'm just nostalgic. But hey, you know, even though Flight Simulator X is like a multi-decade old simulator at this point, you can actually see the AI planes, and they're not hovering over the ground or using generic liveries. Like they actually got different liveries. You can actually see them taxiing around. You can hear them over ATC. All right, let me add some flaps and we'll just take off on the runway. I don't know why AI traffic is so hard for modern sims to do when FSX can do it just fine. Check this out. It's a Dash 8 on approach. It actually feels like a busy airport with traffic coming in and out. Out of the box with no mods and no expensive payware, you know, traffic streaming mods. Go figure. All right, I'm just gonna take off here. Gotta race this MD-80. There we go. All right, 40 knots, rotate. There we go, gear up. Flaps up. Well, anyway, that's about all I wanted to see of Flight Simulator 10. I just thought we'd take a little trip down memory lane and take a look at a classic. Thanks for watching my review of the default 737s and X-Plane and Microsoft Flight Simulator, and have a good day.